What's up, y'all? Welcome back for part 2 of the What You Didn't Know about Tammi Terrell's story. We're not even going to waste time. We're going to jump right into the story. When she was 11, something happened to Tammi that would change her for the rest of her life. One day, she was walking home from a show rehearsal at the local Boys and Girls Club. While doing so, she was attacked, raped, and beaten by 3 boys. After the incident occurred, with her clothes ripped and torn, Tammi composed herself enough to go to the police department to report what had happened to her. Though the boys were eventually caught, that didn't change what had happened to Tammi. As it would do to any person, the attack changed her. Additionally, it affected the entire family. For many weeks, it was very quiet and solemn around the house. For months after the assault, Tammi was sullen and withdrawn. She would go through bouts of crying and staring into space. She also began mumbling in her sleep and suffered from night terrors as well as sleepwalking. Then, as she began to recover, she underwent an extreme transformation. What used to be innocence now had a newfound edge to it. She became wilder, more rebellious, and interested in boys. She began smoking, drinking, and sneaking out of the house late at night. Tammi would take this rebellious streak with her when she went down south again to Sumter in the summer of 1957. While there, she and a cousin would often sneak out at night to hang out at the local juke joint, dancing and occasionally drinking. They would make it home shortly before their grandparents woke up at 5 a.m. Tammi's sister Ludi would later speculate that Tammi's emotional scars from what happened to her led her to become rebellious as a way of coping with her feelings by masking them. At this point in her life, as she was entering junior high school, Tammi began complaining about headaches. They began to become more frequent and severe, causing her to miss school on numerous occasions. When she was at school, Tammi was growing up fast. Too fast. She was dressing much older than your normal 12-year-old would. In fact, she once got suspended for wearing her Aunt Alice's pink see-through blouse to school. Tammi also began smoking around the house. Both of her parents smoke, so cigarettes were always easy for her to get. She started going to more sock hops and school dances. She also became very focused on her dream of becoming a star. She began winning talent contests all over the city. By the time the calendar turned to the year 1958, Tammi had an adult body to go with her adult clothing and her adult behavior. She was always pretty, but she was now also curvy, with a tiny waist and a blossoming bosom. As a result, boys were always calling her coming by her house. Though she enjoyed the attention, after a while it began to annoy her when it got to be too much. She often called on her sister Ludi to shoo the boys away so that she could get some relief from time to time. When it was time for Tammi to go to school, she always had her pick of what boy she wanted to drive her there. She also started going to what the kids call red light parties. This is where teenagers would hang out in the basement bathed in red light, or blue if a blue bulb were used, listening to music, dancing, talking, and munching on snacks. Parents would chaperone, but they were always upstairs and didn't come down the basement unless it got late or something happened. Both boys and girls enjoyed being around Tammi. She was very bubbly and fun to hang out with. When she turned 13, Tammi began hanging out with an older crowd. She was always hanging out with them either at a soda shop or a hoagie shop. Meanwhile, she continued to work on her music, preparing to be a star by constantly listening to herself sing and fine-tuning her skills. It was around this time that Tammi would undergo her first name change. After watching the movie Tammi and the Bachelor, inspired by the movie, she informed her family that she no longer wanted to be called Tammi. For her entire life to that point, everybody had called her Tammi, which was short for her given name Thomasina. She now thought that Tammi was too tomboyish. Conversely, she thought Tammi sounded pretty, and she wanted her family to call her that. They refused and kept calling her Tammi. but she began being introduced as Tammy Montgomery at her talent shows. In the midst of everything that was going on, Tammy had begun hanging out with Lola Falana. Yes, that Lola Falana. The two of them began doing talent shows together and whipped the crowd into a frenzy whenever they did. In the summer of 1959, Tammy's father decided that he wanted to open and run a bed and breakfast. He wanted to open that business in Abascon, New Jersey, which was about an hour away from their home in Philadelphia. More importantly, it was only 6 miles away from Atlantic City. Thomas's idea behind the bed and breakfast was that people would choose to stay there instead of paying the high prices that hotels demanded. Additionally, customers could get home-cooked meals and also enjoy a relaxing atmosphere filled with music. Tammy's Uncle Winnie, her mother's only brother, came to help Thomas run the business. Tammy adored her uncle, as he was not only fun, he was emotionally supportive and helpful to her. The family all had to come together to make this venture a success. It was hard work, but it drew them all closer. Tammy's jobs were to change the linens, make beds, dust, and keep the second floor bathroom clean. That is, those were her jobs until she made friends with a group of girls from Atlantic City. Then she began to ignore her responsibilities and spend more time with those girls. She started going to sock hops, and she was also performing at juke joints in surrounding cities. She was staying out late at night as well as on the weekends. Her father was not happy about any of this. He was still upset that she put so much emphasis on being an entertainer. He reminded her that she used to want to be a doctor, and he tried to get her to focus on going to college. However, Tammy had stars in her eyes. Singing was her first love, and no amount of talking was going to change that. Just like before, as opposed as Tammy's father was to Tammy's desire to be in show business, her mother was the exact opposite. She was excited to help Tammy in whatever move she wanted to make in regards to her music career. At this point in her life, she was feeling good, and getting to support Tammy however she could seemed to make her feel even better. After the summer was over and Tammy returned to Philadelphia to begin school, she was entering even more talent shows than ever. This would continue for the next couple of years. Meanwhile, Tammy continued to mature and work on her look. Besides giving herself facials and tweezing her eyebrows, she also began putting falsies in her bosom. She thought this made her look perky. During this time, Tammy's appearance in a talent show led to a job at the media club. While there, she met a man named Babe Shivian, a well-respected man in the music business. He would eventually become her manager and would help her get signed to Scepter Records in 1960. At the time, Scepter's main artists were Dionne Warwick, the Shirelles, Tommy Hunt, and Chuck Jackson. Shivian introduced Tammy to songwriter-producer Luther Dixon. In 1961, Dixon would write and produce Tammy's first single, titled If You See Bill. The song was about heartache and love, but Tammy was so young that these were things that she hadn't even experienced yet. By the time Tammy turned 17 in 1962, she'd already been singing and recording for Scepter Records in New York, but something would happen that would change her life. Tammy's mother drove her to Wildwood, New Jersey to audition for the group Steve Gibson and the Redcaps. Tammy won the audition and became a part of the group. This would help Tammy take a big step towards being the star she always knew she'd be. Surprisingly, this time her father was on board with what she was doing. He could no longer deny that his daughter was very talented. So instead of fighting her, he supported her, renting an apartment in Wildwood. Meanwhile, the Redcaps were headlining at the Riptide, and Tammy began performing with them. While there were two other female singers who were more experienced, Tammy did well. There was no shortage of opportunities, as the group did 2 shows every night. On the weekends, along with the night shows, they did matinees too. During her performances, Steve Gibson, the leader of the group, gave Tammy a lot of leeway. He let her experiment with her singing style as she tried out different techniques. This helped her fine-tune her phrasing and delivery and started grooming her into a polished stage performer. Tammy not only sang, but she also played the piano and even choreographed her own dance steps. At the age of 17, Tammi was already looking like a seasoned performer. That summer, she got to cross paths with some famous artists, including the Bluebells with Patti LaBelle, Major Lance, the Platters, and the Spinners. Perhaps the highlight of the season, though, was when Tammi got a chance to perform with Etta James. While Tammi learned a lot and working with the Redcaps was a good gig, she could do better. At least that's what her mother thought. She used her brother-in-law Bob's connections to get a meeting with the Godfather himself, James Brown. As a result, one night while Tammi was performing, her mother drove to Atlantic City to see him. She wanted to convince Brown that he needed to come see Tammi perform live himself so that he could see how great she was. More on how that meeting went later. After school was over, Tammi's gig with the Redcaps ended and she went back to school. That didn't stop her from pursuing her music career though, as she would sometimes miss school because she had a show to do. To make up for it, she began attending night school. At this point, Tammi was often in New York in the recording studio. She also got a chance to go out on the road, going to the Caribbean to perform with label mate Chuck Jackson. Something else happened while she was on the road too. She began messing around with label mate Tommy Hunt. At the time, Tammi was only 17, while Hunt was 29. It was no big deal to Tammi, as she dated older guys before. Eventually, though, they broke up. Getting back to Tammy's mother, the last time we talked about her, she was on her way to see James Brown. Whatever she said to him must have been very convincing because Brown listened to her. He went to see Tammi perform and he was impressed. In fact, he was so impressed that he hired her to tour with his revue. In February of 1963, Tammi recorded 2 tracks for James Brown's Try Me label, I Cried and If You Don't Think. Both songs were written by Brown himself. After that, it was time to hit the road with the James Brown revue. To make sure she was ready, Tammi and her mother hit the streets of New York to go shopping. Afterwards, she had everything she needed to shine and look her best. For about 8 months, Tammi toured with Brown, all while she was still doing high school homework. They were mostly one-night gigs that she was doing. Often, her mother was on the road with her. There was also a woman named Gertrude Saunders that traveled with the group. Officially, she was James Brown's wardrobe manager. However, Brown also put her in charge of all the females that traveled with him. Gertrude would chaperone and provide support to the girls, which meant that she kept an eye on Tammi. Shortly after Tammi turned 18, her mother and her sister came to New York to see her perform at the Apollo. Tammi was staying at a fancy suite in Manhattan that had a view of New York's skyline. Beautiful. She regaled her family with stories of all the great things that were going on with her. She was getting facials, manicures, and pedicures every day, along with a professional hair weave. Along with that, James Brown was lavishing her with expensive gifts. He was always buying her beautiful clothes, furs, and jewelry, and he always made sure that she had her favorite perfume, Youth Dew by Estee Lauder. Later, after they finished eating, Tammi took her family on a shopping spree. When they got back to Tammy's suite, her family was surprised by something they saw. James Brown was in the suite, and he was sleeping in Tammy's bed. At this point in time, Brown was 30 years old, meaning that he was 12 years older than Tammi. Brown woke up abruptly from his slumber, sleepily greeted everyone, then quickly left the room. Tammy's mother was worried. What was this scene all about? Despite the awkward situation, eventually Tammy's mother was becoming more comfortable with Tammi being on the road without her, as Gertrude was there to watch out for her. Moreover, both of Tammy's parents met with both James Brown and with Gertrude, and both of them assured the concerned parents that Tammi was in good hands and that they would keep her safe. It all sounded good, but it wasn't true. The real truth was that when the revue wasn't performing, James was physically abusing Tammi. He would regularly hit her in the head, and he once hurt her so bad that she had to get her teeth capped. Gene Chandler, famous for his song Duke of Earl, witnessed one of these beatings firsthand. Once, while James performed, he was angry because Tammi didn't watch every single minute of his performance from the wings on stage. Immediately after his set was over, James walked off the stage and started physically assaulting Tammi. The assault lasted long enough for him to beat her from one level of the venue down to his room in the basement of the building. No one intervened to stop him. Chandler would later say he didn't want to get involved in the drama that Brown and Terrell were always going through in their relationship. Later that evening, Tammi asked Chandler to buy her a bus ticket to Philly so that she could go home. A little after that, having second thoughts about whether he should help Tammi or not, Chandler decided to call her mother and tell her what happened. Tammy's mother came and picked her up the very next day. Once Tammi got home, her family would find confirmation of what Tammi had endured when they helped her unpack her things. In her things, they found a kimono that Brown had bought her. It was completely covered in blood. Tammi would explain to them that the blood was from a time that Brown had physically assaulted her with an umbrella. She also revealed to them that she had wanted to get away from Brown for quite some time, but was afraid of getting in trouble for breaching her contract. However, Brown's final assault was the last straw, and she no longer cared about her contract. She just wanted to go home. We're going to start part 2 of the story right there. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our mini-series, What You Didn't Know About Tammi Terrell. Thank you for listening and watching our video. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, and repeat. Be sure and come back to join us for part 3. Thanks again, and see you soon.